Atari has been making arcade racing games since the 1970s. You might say they've been making the same arcade racing game since the 1970s. Throughout the 70s and 80s, you could walk through an arcade and say, yep, there's that Atari driving game. Now with Atari being back, again, to make games again, comes NeoSprint, a 21st century update to their long-running franchise. Starting with a game called Grand Track 10 in 1974, Atari has iterated on a very simple style of racing game throughout the years. Later versions included coin-ops such as Indy 800 and Le Mans. Sprint would become the most popular entry of this long-running series and the name they would eventually settle on going forward. There were 1-player, 2-player, 4-player, and even 8-player arcade cabinets for Sprint throughout the late 1970s. Most of you watching this probably remember seeing Super Sprint in arcades in the mid-1980s. Championship Sprint came out a little later, as well as a few other variants like Badlands, which introduced a story and some car combat to those games. Overall though, the games were pretty simple. Get more points than the other players or the computer racers, or else you're done. Put another quarter in, loser, try again. One of the biggest draws for arcade racers, especially back in the day, was that you got to use controls that you probably never would have had access to at home. Racing wheels for home use today are expensive but easily found, but were rare and limited in the heyday of arcades. The Sprint games in particular were always fun in arcades because even just walking by one meant that you could grab that steering wheel and just spin it. Admit it, you did that. Everyone did that. Much to the chagrin of arcade owners even to this day. While some of these later Sprint games were ported to home consoles or computers, they were always meant to be played with a wheel. Indy 500 on the Atari 2600 used custom racing controllers. But so how will NeoSprint fare being the first one of these built with standard home controllers in mind? Well, I'm pleased to say that the tutorial felt redundant. That's how well the controls work. It controls exactly how you think it should with a controller, and that's great. Now, it will take you a bit of time to get the feel of either the regular brake or the hand brake, but that's all racing games. You just have to figure out that timing. Once you realize that the controls make sense, you'll be at home with NeoSprint's familiar brand of racing. Whipping around constant sharp turns is the name of the game here, and while your car has a bit of a floaty feel to it, it moves well enough to get you where you're pointing it to go. Unlike previous installments, you're not racing against the clock. You have to finish the race before your opponents to continue on. You can choose standard viewing mode or to lock the camera to your car, giving you a closer look at the action. Sometimes if the track is large enough, the standard view makes everything look like ants, so this locked-on mode might be the more appealing of the two. The cars included are branded with Atari references, some more subtle than others. This is the name of the enemy creature in Yar's Revenge, for example, and this is just the Atari links. The entire game is just dripping with Atari stuff. The races are sponsored by every Atari trademark you can think of, backdrops, signage, stickers. If it's an Atari brand, it's all over this thing. I don't mind it, but also you could maybe use it a bit more sparingly. I realize nostalgia is the aim here, but you can do that without going overboard. Make up a brand of tires or engines or something. You don't just have to put the word Pong everywhere. It doesn't even make sense to have a modern racing championship sponsored by Pong. NeoSprint has a campaign mode as well as free races and custom tournaments. Up to 8 players can compete in multiplayer, although that seems to be confined to local multiplayer only, which is a bit of a bummer. Elsewhere, you'll find an obstacle course mode and a track builder, which are going to be the things that make or break the longevity of this release. This is the only online portion of the game, as you can create, share, and vote on tracks that others have made. While you can unlock car stuff playing through the career mode, you also unlock new objects for these latter two modes, various course pieces, and hazards that you can include on the tracks themselves. Some of this stuff is available from the start, but there's lots more to unlock. Now, I didn't get deep into the obstacle course stuff as I was focused on the campaign races and most of the time I've spent with it so far, but I think my brain started immediately coming up with ideas for this mode that the game itself probably isn't going to do. The limited obstacle courses I had access to had your standard assortment of hazards. Traffic cones, oil on the track, etc. But with the amount of Atari branding all over this thing, I'm envisioning potential mayhem on the course. Like Bentley Bear running around weaving in and out of your way, or a combat tank battle breaking out in one section of the track, and you have to avoid the shots. That kind of chaos. Will it happen? I don't think so, but it should. I'm not faulting the game for what it's not, but those things would be a much smarter implementation of the branding that they're trying to do here. Atari's NeoSprint is a fine update to their classic Sprint racing series. It won't wow you with technological advancements like those games did back when they were coming out in arcades, but if you're all in on Atari's strategy of all nostalgia all the time, this will probably work for you. Each iteration of that series always sort of invoked this "wow, cool, now you can do this" reaction in arcades, and this one is just meant to prompt you to say, hey, I remember this game and these brands. As it stands, it's certainly not advancing the genre in any way, but it's still a decent little throwback racer.